Breaking news tonight, the verdict is in for the man charged with the murder of Fort Valley State University student Anitra Gunn. DeMarcus Little was found guilty and immediately taken into custody. Our Brittany Miller has been in the courtroom every single day for this trial, and she now joins us live with what happened this evening. Brittany.
Victoria, just 2 hours ago, DeMarcus Little was found guilty of felony murder and aggravated assault for strangling his ex-girlfriend Anitra Gunn. After 7 days of testimony, the courtroom filled with tears from both family and prosecutors as the verdict was announced. Throughout this trial, I've described for you DeMarcus Little's demeanor in the courtroom. He was cold, sitting perfectly still and staring straight ahead. But tonight, Little rocked back and forth in his chair after we got word that a verdict was in. The defendant was found not guilty of malice murder, but that did not sway Anitra Gunn's family away from asking the judge for life without the possibility of parole.
Valentine's Day 2020. While couples exchanged roses and chocolates, 22-year-old Anitra Gunn took her last breath, strangled by the man who called her his soulmate. 4 days later, her barefoot body was found, abandoned in the woods. But the truth of what happened that day, it's far worse than anyone imagined. February 18th, 2020. 4 days had passed since Valentine's Day, and 22-year-old Anitra Gunn was still missing. Lieutenant Brian Stewart of the Peach County Sheriff's Office pulled up to 420 Chestnut Hill Road that afternoon. Rain had been falling across Georgia all day, soaking the ground and making everything feel heavy. He was there for a welfare check, following up on concerns about Anitra's disappearance. When he arrived at the house, nobody answered. The place felt empty. Wrong. Lieutenant Stewart didn't stop there, and something told him to keep looking. He got back in his patrol car and started driving slowly through the surrounding area, past orchards, farmland, and stretches of woods, along Chestnut Hill Road, then down Wolf Oak and Tanglewood roads. That's when he saw it. Tree branches that looked damaged, and like something had crashed through them. He stopped the car and got out. As he walked closer, pushing aside the wet branches, his heart sank. There, lying under the trees, was a body. It was Anitra Gunn. Anitra was lying on her back in the dirt, partially hidden beneath branches someone had placed over her. She was barefoot. Her denim shorts were still on, but her shirt had been pulled up, exposing her chest. Her arms were crossed, and her legs were positioned awkwardly. Her face told the story of how she died. It was darker than the rest of her body, a clear sign of strangulation. Her limbs were pale, drained of color. Tiny red spots covered the whites of her eyes, caused by blood vessels bursting when she couldn't breathe. There were scratches and scrapes on her hips, thighs, and back. These weren't from the attack itself. They came after she was already dead. Drag marks. Someone had pulled her body across rough ground to dump her here. One detail stood out among all the horror. Anitra's socks were stuffed inside the pocket of her shorts. She had been wearing them at some point, but whoever killed her had removed them. Why? No one knows. The scene was heartbreaking. This wasn't just a murder. It was an attempt to hide what had been done to her. Within hours, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrived, where their crime task force took over immediately, treating this as a homicide from the start. News spread fast. Fort Valley State University, where Anitra was a senior just weeks away from graduation, went into shock. Students couldn't believe it. Teachers were devastated. This was one of their own. What had started as a missing person case was now a murder investigation. Anitra had last been seen on Valentine's Day, 4 days earlier. Where had she been? Who had she been with? And most importantly, who did this to her? Detectives knew they had to move fast. Evidence was already being collected from the scene, but the clock was ticking. Whoever killed Anitra Gunn had a 4-day head start. Before we go further into what happened to Anitra, if you're new here, this channel covers true crime cases with respect and depth. We hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Now let's talk about who Anitra really was. Anitra Lachey Gunn was 22 years old and in her final year at Fort Valley State University, a historically black university located about 35 miles south of Macon, Georgia. She was a senior just weeks away from walking across that graduation stage and starting the next chapter of her life. She had no children. Her focus was on finishing school and building her future. That future was full of possibilities, until it was stolen from her on Valentine's Day, 2020. Not much is publicly known about Anitra's childhood or early years. Like many victims, her story became defined by how she died, rather than how she lived. But what we do know is that she was loved deeply by her family. Yet that love was painfully clear during the trial 2 years later. When the courtroom heard graphic details about how Anitra died, her family members broke down in tears. Some had to leave the room because the pain was too much to bear. When the man accused of killing her took the stand and spoke about her, Anitra's father couldn't stay. He walked out, unable to listen to the person who destroyed his daughter's life talk about loving her. Anitra wasn't just a victim, she was a daughter, a student, a young woman with dreams that will never come true. At some point before her death, Anitra started dating a man named DeMarcus Little. He was 23 years old and served as a sergeant in the United States Army. On paper, he seemed like a decent guy. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would raise red flags. And his own father would later defend him, saying, "He's a good son. He's a sergeant in the United States Army, serving our country proudly. Never gotten in any trouble in his life." From the outside, DeMarcus Little looked like someone you could trust, someone who had his life together, someone who would never hurt the woman he claimed to love. But appearances can be deceiving. DeMarcus Little wore his military uniform with pride. He had structure, discipline, and respect in his professional life. People saw him as responsible and honorable. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. The man Anitra knew wasn't the same person everyone else saw. In private, Little was controlling, possessive, jealous. And as time went on, his behavior got worse. What started as a relationship would soon turn into something dangerous. And the warning signs, they were there long before Anitra's life ended. In early February 2020, just weeks before Anitra's murder, DeMarcus Little did something that should have been a massive red flag. He went to Anitra's apartment and smashed her windows. Then he slashed her tires. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of frustration. This was deliberate destruction meant to send a message. I can get to you. I can hurt what's yours. You can't escape me. Police arrested Little for criminal damage to property. He was charged and held in custody, waiting for a bail hearing. But here's the thing. Most people don't understand how serious property destruction really is in abusive relationships. When someone breaks your windows or slashes your tires, they're not just damaging objects. They're showing you what they're capable of. They're testing boundaries. They're saying, if I can destroy your things, I can destroy you too. Experts who study domestic violence know this pattern well. Abuse doesn't usually start with physical violence. It starts with control. Then it moves to intimidation, then threats, then property damage, and finally it becomes physical. This wasn't passion. This was terrorism. DeMarcus Little was trying to control Anitra through fear, and when fear didn't work, he took it further. He wanted her to know that if he couldn't have her, he could ruin her life. He could make her feel unsafe in her own home. But even after his arrest, even after being charged, Little wasn't done. He was still obsessed with Anitra, and that obsession was about to turn deadly. During the trial in 2022, prosecutors revealed something chilling. Guys, they had recovered numerous abusive text messages that DeMarcus Little had sent to Anitra before her death. These weren't love letters. They were threats, manipulation, intimidation. The messages showed a clear pattern of possessive and controlling behavior. The Macon Judicial Circuit District Attorney's Office said these messages directly led to her killing. They painted a picture of a man who couldn't let go, a man who saw Anitra as his property, not as a person. The texts showed Little's jealousy, his anger, and his refusal to accept any boundaries Anitra tried to set. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she was with, what she was doing. And if she didn't respond fast enough, he lashed out. This digital trail of abuse became key evidence in the case. It proved that Little's violence wasn't a one-time mistake, or it was a pattern, a build-up, a countdown to murder. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. DeMarcus Little was possessive. He couldn't handle the idea of Anitra having her own life, her own friends, her own space. He needed to control everything about her. He couldn't accept boundaries. When Anitra tried to distance herself or set limits, he responded with anger and destruction, and the violence kept escalating. It started with emotional abuse, the controlling texts, the jealousy, the manipulation. Then it moved to property destruction, the broken windows, the slashed tires, and finally it became physical, fatal. Here's something important to know. 1 in 4 women will experience severe intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And if someone has been strangled by their partner, even once, their risk of being murdered by that partner increases by 750%. Strangulation isn't just another form of abuse. It's a predictor of murder. Anitra's friends and family would later wonder, could this have been stopped? Could someone have intervened? Could she have been saved? Sadly, cases like Anitra's happen far too often. Have you or someone you know experienced warning signs like these? What state or country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Your story might help someone else recognize danger. And if this case is affecting you, please hit that like button to help spread awareness. February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day. A day meant for love, flowers, and celebration. For Anitra Gunn, it would be the last day of her life. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Anitra and DeMarcus Little were together at a Waffle House. Witnesses saw them there, sitting across from each other. This would be Anitra's last meal. When her autopsy was performed days later, her stomach was empty. She hadn't eaten anything after leaving that restaurant. Rain fell across Peach County that morning. The sky was gray and heavy. The kind of weather that makes everything feel slower, quieter, more isolated. As the hours passed, Anitra and DeMarcus ended up at his aunt's house, 420 Chestnut Hill Road. The home belonged to Cherie Tolbert, and it was there around 11:30 in the morning that everything would change. Neither of them knew these would be Anitra's final hours. Or maybe DeMarcus did. Maybe he had already made up his mind about what he was going to do. Inside that house, something happened that would end Anitra's life. According to testimony from Javon Abron, a friend of DeMarcus who would later hear his confession, DeMarcus told Anitra that he loved her. He poured his heart out. He called her his soulmate. And Anitra laughed. We'll never know why. Was it nervous laughter? Was it disbelief? Was it her way of deflecting something she didn't want to hear? Maybe she was uncomfortable. Maybe she didn't feel the same way. Maybe she was just trying to lighten the mood. But DeMarcus didn't see it that way. He saw rejection, humiliation, disrespect, and he snapped. DeMarcus grabbed Anitra. He wrapped his hands or his arm around her neck and squeezed. He strangled her manually, cutting off her air, crushing her throat. Anitra fought back. She clawed at his hands, trying to pull them away. Each of the scratches found on her neck during the autopsy showed how desperately she tried to free herself. She scratched at him. She struggled. She fought with everything she had. But DeMarcus didn't stop. For several agonizing minutes, Anitra fought for her life. Her lungs burned. Her vision blurred. Her body screamed for oxygen that wouldn't come. And then she stopped moving. Anitra Gunn was dead, strangled to death by the man who claimed to love her, the man who called her his soulmate, the man who couldn't handle being laughed at. Her body went limp. Her eyes stared at nothing. At just 22 years old, weeks away from graduating college, Anitra's life was over. DeMarcus Little didn't call for help. He didn't try to revive her. He didn't confess to what he had done. Instead, he decided to hide it. He picked up Anitra's lifeless body and carried her outside. He opened the trunk of her white Chevy Cruze and placed her inside, folding her into the small space like she was nothing more than cargo. Then he got into his own car, a black 2019 Toyota Corolla with red pinstripes, and drove away from the house. He took her to a wooded area off Greer Road in Crawford County. It was isolated, quiet, the kind of place where no one would think to look. DeMarcus pulled Anitra's body out of the trunk and dragged her into the trees. The rough ground scraped her skin, leaving marks on her hips, thighs, and back. He pulled branches over her, trying to hide what he had done. He took off her socks and stuffed them into her pocket. Why? No one knows. Then he left. He drove away, leaving Anitra barefoot and alone in the cold, wet woods. As Valentine's Day turned to night, couples across the country were celebrating love. And Anitra's family had no idea she was already gone. When Anitra didn't come home on Valentine's Day, her family tried calling her. No answer. They texted. Nothing. Hours turned into a full day, then 2 days. She missed her classes at Fort Valley State University. Her friends hadn't heard from her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Something was very wrong. Her family contacted the police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched a missing person case. For 4 days, investigators searched. They asked questions. They followed leads. They checked her apartment, her usual hangouts, anywhere she might be. The Fort Valley community was on edge. Students whispered in hallways. Parents called their kids to make sure they were safe. And everyone wanted to know, where is Anitra Gunn? Then, on February 18th, Lieutenant Brian Stewart found her body in the woods. The missing person case became a murder investigation. On February 20th, 2020, Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners, an associate medical examiner with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, performed Anitra's autopsy. His findings were heartbreaking. Cause of death: homicide by manual strangulation. Dr. Koopmeiners documented injuries that told the story of Anitra's final moments. Some of these injuries happened while she was still alive, while she was fighting for her life. Pre-mortem injuries included neck abrasions and bruising. On the right side of her neck, there were pressure marks where someone's hand or arm had squeezed. On the left side, though, there were crescent-shaped scratches, likely from Anitra's own fingernails as she desperately tried to pull her attacker's hands away. A bruise on her forehead, consistent with being punched in the face. A bruise on her upper lip, consistent with someone putting their hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. Injuries on her hips from the struggle. But there were also post-mortem injuries. Injuries that happened after Anitra was already dead. Abrasions on her hips, thighs, and back. These were drag marks. Someone had pulled her body across rough ground. Her clothing was displaced. Her shirt had been pulled up. Her socks were stuffed in her pocket. Other forensic details painted a grim picture. Anitra's stomach was empty, confirming she hadn't eaten since the Waffle House at 2 a.m. There were larvae in her mouth, which helped investigators estimate how long her body had been exposed to the elements. Toxicology tests came back negative for drugs. There was a trace of alcohol, but it was likely from decomposition, not consumption. A sexual assault kit was collected along with fingernail clippings and scalp samples. However, no confirmed sexual assault was found. The evidence was clear. Anitra had been strangled to death, then dumped like trash in the woods. Here's the thing: DeMarcus Little was already in police custody when Anitra's body was found. He had been arrested earlier that week for the property damage at Anitra's apartment. He was sitting in jail waiting for a bail hearing when investigators discovered her body. On Friday, February 21st, something big happened. Todd Crosby, an assistant special agent in charge with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, announced that they had developed enough evidence to obtain an arrest warrant for malice murder. Crosby wouldn't reveal the specifics of what that evidence was, but he made it clear this was a major development. DeMarcus Little hadn't posted bond on the property damage charges yet. Now he didn't need to worry about that anymore. He was being charged with murder. The charges were upgraded. Little went from facing a misdemeanor for breaking windows and slashing tires to facing life in prison for taking Anitra's life. Investigators were building a strong case, and they were moving fast. One of the key pieces of evidence came from a man named Javon Abram. He was a friend of DeMarcus Little and also knew Anitra Gunn. On February 16th, just 2 days after the murder and 2 days before Anitra's body was found, DeMarcus and Javon went to church together. After the service, DeMarcus pulled Javon aside, and he confessed. DeMarcus told Javon what he had done. He admitted to strangling Anitra. He explained how it happened. He told him where he had left her body. But Javon didn't go to the police. Not right away. When investigators interviewed him, Javon lied. He withheld information. He gave false statements. He concealed the truth about Anitra's death. His silence may have cost precious time. While Javon stayed quiet, Anitra's family was still searching, still hoping, still praying she would come home alive. Eventually, the truth came out. Javon was charged with 2 counts of making false statements and 1 count of concealing a death. Meanwhile, investigators matched DeMarcus Little's fingerprints to Anitra's white Chevy Cruze using the automated fingerprint identification system. He had been in her car. He had used it to transport her body. The case against DeMarcus Little was getting stronger by the day. More than 2 years after Anitra's murder, DeMarcus Little finally stood trial in March 2022. The courtroom was packed. Anitra's family sat in the front rows, their faces heavy with grief. Media filled the back. Community members who had followed the case came to witness justice. The atmosphere was tense and emotional. Everyone knew this trial would determine whether Anitra's killer would spend the rest of his life behind bars. DeMarcus Little faced 3 charges: malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. Assistant District Attorney Dawn Baskin led the prosecution, and she was methodical, thorough, and determined to prove that DeMarcus Little murdered Anitra Gunn in cold blood. Baskin presented the evidence piece by piece, building a timeline that showed exactly how Little's behavior escalated from control to murder. First, she showed the jury the property damage from early February, the broken windows at Anitra's apartment, the slashed tires. This wasn't random vandalism, this was intimidation. Then came the abusive text messages. Prosecutors revealed numerous texts that showed a clear pattern of manipulation, threats, and possessive behavior. These messages proved that Little saw Anitra as his property, not as a person with her own life and choices. Next, Javon Abron took the stand. He testified about DeMarcus's confession after church on February 16th. He told the jury what Little had admitted, that he strangled Anitra after she laughed at his profession of love. Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners, the medical examiner, presented the autopsy findings. He walked the jury through Anitra's injuries: the neck bruising, the defensive scratches, the forehead bruise, the drag marks. His testimony was graphic and painful to hear. Family members in the courtroom cried openly. Some had to leave because the details were too much to bear. Prosecutors also presented fingerprint evidence. DeMarcus Little's prints were found in Anitra's white Chevy Cruze, the car used to transport her body. The evidence painted a clear picture: possessiveness, rejection, rage, murder. Dawn Baskin told the jury that DeMarcus Little couldn't handle being laughed at, so he took Anitra's life. Yet Little's defense team tried to create reasonable doubt. Their main argument? Anitra was bigger than DeMarcus. She weighed about 30 pounds more than him. If he really attacked her, wouldn't she have been able to fight him off? They pointed to the defensive wounds on her neck, the scratches, the struggle. They argued that Anitra could have fought back more effectively if she wanted to. But the prosecution had a strong counter-argument. Strangulation doesn't require size or strength. It requires surprise and positioning. When someone wraps their arm or hands around your neck from behind or catches you off guard, your size doesn't matter. You're fighting for air, not fighting back. And Anitra did fight. The scratches on her neck proved it. But desperation isn't the same as a coordinated attack. She was trying to survive, not win a fight. When then came the most dramatic moment of the trial. DeMarcus Little stood up to take the witness stand in his own defense. The moment he stood, Anitra's father got up and walked out of the courtroom. He couldn't bear to sit there and listen to the man who killed his daughter speak. Dawn Baskin questioned DeMarcus directly. And what did he say? He called Anitra his soulmate. He said she was his lifeline, He started to sniffle and cry as he told the courtroom, "She meant everything to me." The contrast was jarring. This man who sent abusive texts, who smashed her windows, who strangled her to death and dumped her body in the woods, was now crying on the stand, claiming he loved her. The jury had to reconcile his words with his actions. How do you strangle your soulmate to death? Wait, how do you leave the person who meant everything to you barefoot in the cold woods like garbage? His testimony didn't add up, and the jury saw right through it. On Tuesday night, March 15th, 2022, the jury returned with their verdict: not guilty of malice murder. This charge requires proof of premeditation, that Little planned to kill Anitra ahead of time. The jury didn't believe there was enough evidence to prove that, but they did find him guilty of felony murder. This means he killed Anitra while committing another felony, in this case, aggravated assault. They also found him guilty of aggravated assault. The courtroom reacted. Some family members cried in relief. Others sat in stunned silence. Judge Connie Williford presided over the trial and would now decide his sentence. Judge Williford didn't hesitate. Then she sentenced DeMarcus Little to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never walk free. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars for what he did to Anitra Gunn. Justice was served. But it couldn't bring Anitra back. It couldn't undo the pain her family would carry forever. For Anitra's loved ones, the verdict brought a mix of relief and permanent grief. They got justice, but they lost her. If this case has impacted you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share this video. Anitra's story needs to be heard. And make sure you're subscribed, because we cover cases like this every week, always with respect for the victims. Now let's talk about what we can learn from this tragedy. If someone destroys your property, breaks your windows, slashes your tires, or damages your belongings, that is a major red flag. It's not just anger, it's a threat. Watch for possessive behavior and controlling texts. If someone constantly demands to know where you are, who you're with, or gets angry when you don't respond immediately, that's abuse. And here's something critical. If a partner has ever put their hands around your neck, even as a joke, your risk of being murdered by that person increases by 750%. Abuse follows a pattern. It starts with emotional control, moves to property destruction, then becomes physical, and can end in death. Anitra Gunn was just 22 years old. She was weeks away from graduating college. Her future was full of promise and possibility. Her life was stolen by someone who claimed to love her. But real love doesn't control. Real love doesn't threaten. Real love doesn't destroy. Real love doesn't kill. We can honor Anitra's memory by learning the warning signs, speaking up when we see abuse, and supporting survivors. Rest in peace, Anitra Gunn. Your story will not be forgotten.